erased a bunch of stuff. Oral sex, we got some younger ones here. All sorts of different kinds of sexual practice were listed. I just replaced that with sex. When I send you the videos, the slides, you can see the whole list. These things need to be taught in education. The only way to combat heterosexism and gender conformity is comprehensive sex education. That's the goal here. Gender identity expression and sexual orientation are a spectrum. And those opposed to homosexuality are stuck in a binary box that religion and family create. Who are the problems for the great utopian experiment, religion and family? Go all the way back to John Dewey, right? Go back to Dunphy, who said, we must replace Christianity with our own progressive humanism here. This is the enemy, right? All right, let me explain to you what Common Core is in the backdrop of this, because Common Core is an extension of this. Common Core. Again, I'll ask you, how many of you believe the purpose of education is to level kids off and make them the same kid? How many of you believe the ambition of public education should be to force every kid to be at exactly the same point? How in the world could that be useful education? Your kids aren't the same kids. How many of you have daughters and sons or grandchildren of from the same parents who don't have the same talents and gifts? And why would you want every kid to be the same? We all have different gifts. The previous education prior to 1850 certainly, and well into the 20th century was individualized, right? That allowed, by all means, give kids a broad education, expose them to all sorts of things, but let the kids that can get ahead, get ahead. We are losing gifted and talented programs. We are losing honors programs at unprecedented rates. We've lost more gifted and talented honors programs across the country in the last 2 years than in the previous 40 years combined. Because in a common education, no one is allowed to be uncommon. And so who really pays the price here at things like Common Core? The kids who can jump ahead of their peers in certain subjects. We won't have it anymore. We're already, do you know that about 40% of high schools across the country have eliminated calculus from high school? Mm-hmm. They've eliminated it because so few kids get that far. It's not fair to let the few that do. So they've gotten rid of it. Right? In fact, there's a school now in Kansas just 2 days ago who got rid of calculus and replaced it with a mandatory diversity class as one of the 4-year math credits. I'll give you all that stuff. This is Washington State. Whenever I give these talks, the only argument I've ever gotten about any of this stuff is you're a right-wing lunatic. That's the argument. Anybody who opposes Common Core is a tinfoil hat-wearing nut job. Despite what Dewey and Mann and the NEA and Denise Schneider, all these people have said all these things. I'm going to show you, in fact, my entire presentation, I'm going to show you why Common Core won't work. I'm going to use only left-wing sources. So by all means, consider me a tinfoil hat-wearing lunatic. Let's see how, make the lefties tinfoil hat-wearers. Because everything you're about to see comes from them. This is the Washington State Democrat Party. And if you know anything about Washington State, that's kind of a hippie-palooza out there, right? The Democrats in Washington State, about 1.5 years ago, passed the first state Democrat Party resolution condemning Common Core throughout the whole state. Here's what they said in January 24th of 2015. The Central Committee of the Washington, by the way, if you want to run for public office as a Democrat in Washington State, you have to sign on to this platform, or the state Democrat Party won't give you any money. The Central Committee of the Washington State Democrat Party has passed a resolution that roundly condemns the Common Core standards. This is the very first time a statewide Democrat Party committee has taken a public position against Common Core, and it happened in the backyard of the Bill Gates Foundation. Gates has spent about $7 billion putting Common Core in your schools, Texas schools. Not that much in Texas, but he spent $8 billion. Much of it was centered in Texas. Please, let me ask you this question. What qualifies Bill Gates to be involved in your kids' public school education? No. Nothing. Can you imagine if this were the evil Koch brothers who put up $8 billion of their own money? Can you imagine that? What would the New York Times be saying? What would the people at the state of Texas Department of Public Instruction be saying about a right-wing billionaire basically buying access to American public schools? But you've not heard a word about this, and no one complains about it because Gates is a good progressive. But the progressives of Washington State are rebelling against what Gates is doing. This happened in the backyard of the Gates Foundation, which is providing the funding that made the National Standards Project possible. This could signal a sea change. We can skip that. All right, here's the actual statement that Democrats put forward. In it, you will find every objection I have to Common Core that I've been talking about for 5 years. Number one, Whereas the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable Common Core state standards all this talk that they're just a set of standards and you can meet them 1,000 different ways is patently absurd. It's patent absurdity. As the Washington State Democrats tell you, they're copyrighted, right? They are a set of controversial, top-down academic standards. But I thought the states wrote them. I mean, they're called the Common Core state standards. The states didn't write any of them. Nobody at the state level had any input on this whatsoever. States took Common Core by a big fat federal bribe. Only after 46 states took Common Core did anybody in those states see it. And after they saw it, no teachers, no teacher groups, no unions had any ability to write, revise, or change any of the standards. Once your state was bought into them, and again, Texas is an exception, I understand that, but once 46 states were bought into that, you took the standards for the money, and that was it. They are a set of controversial, they're top-down, the Democrats tell us. They weren't written by teachers, they weren't written by parents, and they certainly weren't written by states. They are a set of controversial, top-down, K-12 academic standards that were created by wealthy private interest groups, that's exactly right, and all of it was done without any research-based evidence of validity. Not a single meaningful test was ever done to see if they were legitimate standards, if they would work, if the implementation, the methodology, if the standards themselves were even practical. Never tested. How many times have you heard, Common Core is better than what we have? How can you know that? When they created it, they didn't even know it. There was no track record for it. Yet they were, same way they were, the Affordable Care Act was sold to you, right? Well, we called it affordable, therefore it must be. How many people bought that? We call it common, we call it state standards. How many people actually believe that? But the Democrats in Washington State know it's not true. Promulgated by wealthy private interest groups without any research-based evidence of validity. And how about this one? And they are developmentally inappropriate, especially in the youngest grade. They are things you're asking kids to do things at the youngest grade that they developmentally cannot do, or they should not do. That's the insertion of all the sexuality, which we'll get to in a moment. Developmentally inappropriate, the Washington State progressives tell you, particularly for the younger kids. And we've seen that time and time again. All these moms pulling all these books out of their kids. You're reading this, you're 10 years old, for God's sake. We'll talk more about that. Then they also say, and how did the federal government get them in your schools? Well, whereas, as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, 2 private lobbyist groups, 2 private trade associations, not teachers, not states, not governors, 2 private lobbying groups, K Street Washington lobbyist groups. They were given billions of dollars by Bill Gates to create the standards. 5 people wrote these standards. Other people looked at them. 5 people created these standards. That was it. And the leader of the group, David Coleman, has absolutely no educational background whatsoever. He's never been a teacher, never done a course in pedagogy, never been in front of a classroom. We'll get to him in a moment. These 2 Washington lobbyist groups received millions of dollars in funding from the Gates Foundation to create the standard. So you're saying, well, if the federal government wanted to control education, why didn't they just do it like they did healthcare? Well, because 3 different laws dating from 1965 prohibit the federal government from creating national standards or a national curriculum. They legally couldn't do it. So what happened? They allowed these 5 individuals to be paid by Gates to write the standards. Who put them in the government? Who put them in your schools? There's only one force out there that can put these standards in your schools. It's the federal government. Not even governors. Who did this in 46 states? The feds. That's why it's a federal program. How did that happen? Whereas the U.S. Department of Education improperly pressured state legislatures into adopting the Common Core state standards and the high-stakes standardized tests based on them as a condition of competing for federal race to the top dollars. In 2009, when President Obama took office, right, he immediately set up, remember the stimulus money? Yes. In 2008, when President Bush left office, and President Obama was coming in 2009, both the Republican and the Democrat told us that unless we cough up billions and billions of dollars of federal taxpayer money to bail out banks and car companies, the whole system would collapse. Did you know that about $6 billion of your stimulus funding went right back to the Department of Education to create the tests? Did you know that? I'll prove that to you in a moment. In other words, you used your tax dollars to bail out, you thought, to bail out the economy, and a big chunk of that money, the feds paid themselves. President Obama handed it over to Arne Duncan as Secretary of Education. They created the Common Core test. And by the way, the Common Core tests existed before the Common Core standards were ever even written. That should tell you something, right? What drives the standards here? It's the tests, right? And whoever controls the tests then controls what goes on in your schools. That's why you don't have to control Texas, because your kids are being prepared to take big Common Core tests, whether you know it or not. They can call them all sorts, they've given them all sorts of cutesy Texas names. Florida renamed their tests the Sunshine State tests, because everybody hated Common Core. Right? So now half of Florida thinks we don't have Common Core anymore. Our district was one, and it's just Common Core with a new name. That's going on in most of your schools, Texas, right? So what was raised to the top? 2009, $6 billion goes from the federal government, from your pockets, to the Department of Education. The Department of Education then turns around and starts offering race to the top grants to all the states. Every state in the union was encouraged to apply for free money. To give you an example, in 2009, 2009, New York became the first state in the union to win a big federal race to the top grant. New York got $700 million of federal money, went right to the Treasury Department for the schools. The money went to the schools, not the state. So New York got $700 million, and that money they could spend on anything they want. But you know what the only meaningful provision was? Any state that took race to the top money was obligated to take the Common Core standards when they were finally written. So 46 states took money one time, and 46 states then were obligated to accept the core. That's how it happened. So by the most technical of technicalities, the states did this to themselves by taking money. But you know what? Not a single state had seen the standards before they took the money. 44 of the 46 states took the money before the standards were even written. They didn't even know they were getting it. New York said, okay, you give us the money now, in 2 years, whatever you roll down the pipe, we'll take, and that's how you got it. That, by the way, is what Texas rebelled against. You said, no, we're not going to take that money, and we're not going to have Common Core, but we'll explain why you have it. It didn't work. It was a noble idea. But this idea that the feds bribed Common Core sight unseen into your states, that's what the Washington Dems are objecting to. Common Core state standards, high stakes tests, as a condition of competing for federal race to the top stimulus funds that should have been based on need, and whereas the implementation of Common Core is already costing local school districts hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for standardized computer-based tests, new technology, curricula, and teacher training at a time when Washington State is already insufficiently funding basic K-12 education. All of this without any proven benefit to your kids. They don't know if it's going to work. Your kids are guinea pigs. Guinea pigs. I'll let Bill Gates tell you that. Don't trust me. These are the Washington State Democrats. Right? All of this without any proven benefit to students. And whereas some states have already withdrawn from Common Core, which technically really isn't true, nobody has, therefore, be it resolved that we call upon the Washington State Legislature and the Superintendent of Public Schools to withdraw from Common Core and keep K-12 education student-centered and accountable to the people of Washington State. That's a good idea. Wouldn't you rather have Texas in charge of Texas? Because, I mean, right now, you want to change what's going on in Texas schools? Call the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Go ahead. Dial 1-800-Department of Ed. How much Muzak do you think you're going to have to listen to, Texas, before somebody over there picks up the phone and listens to your complaint about what the feds are doing? It's not going to happen. That was the Washington State Democrats about a year and a half ago. Liberals. This is Arne Duncan, President Obama's Secretary of Education for 7.5 years. He's the man who put Common Core together. He was the guy who oversaw it all. Those billions of dollars of your stimulus money went to his Department of Education to create the tests. Listen to what Arne Duncan, think about what I showed, some of those clips I showed you from Mann and Dewey and Dunphy and Yenier. Listen to Arne Duncan's vision for your schools.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that.
At home, we attach healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools, where schools truly become the centers of the community great things happen. And this is a chance to really create what I think the 21st century school has to look like. This needs to be the norm, not the exception. Time matters tremendously, and all of our families need our doors open long term.
Is this a big ticket item in terms of financial resources?
Finances is a piece of this, and we again have significant financial resources, unprecedented financial resources coming to the table. Let me be clear, this is thinking differently, being creative.
This is 2009. We want not the churches, not the families, not the local community government. The schools need to be the center of the community. We want them open 8 hours a day. We want them open 365 days a year. We're already beginning to attach health care clinics to our schools. Why do you think, remember what they said about psychosocial evaluation? You remember what they said about teachers having to become psychosocial therapists? Your daughter, your 12-year-old daughter shows up to school with a couple of Midol once a month. She could be suspended for trafficking in drugs. But they're now building clinics on schools so they can do all sorts of things. One of the provisions that people don't recognize, I mentioned Obamacare a couple of times. You should read the sections of Obamacare, I'll send you the links, that deal with educational health. Once the federal government controls healthcare, they get to decide what healthcare is. And one of the subsets of healthcare for the federal government now is education. Education is a form of healthcare. Why are they going to put clinics on your kids' schools? Why? In fact, new construction. Right? About 50% of newly constructed schools in the last 6 years, about 50% of them have been built with fully functional clinics. Because under the provisions of Obamacare, your 13-year-old daughter can go to a school administrator and be given the morning after abortion pill. She could be given pretty intense birth control, and she doesn't have to consult you. The schools can become places where this is doled out in the name of educational health, right? By the way, it's already happening, and it's happening here in Texas. My sister-in-law lives in Houston, in the Woodlands, and her 13-year-old daughter was encouraged by the school nurse to get on birth control. And when my little niece, Shaylin, said, I don't think my mom would love that, was told by the doctor directly, the nurse directly, your parents don't have any say over this. 13 years old.
Sir, in all due respect,
Sure.
I just want to be clear on something. That whole notion,
Go ahead, keep talking. I went black here. Keep talking.
I mean, you're not, there's nobody farther right than me and an activist or a Republican Party born-again perspective, but I'm telling you, your fear-mongering on this is wrong. Now, I'll give you an example. As a born-again Christian, we are putting in our schools in Louisville ISD, 53,000 person school district, clinics because we have 30% of our kids under economically disadvantaged. And the fact is, when those kids come to school, we're trying to find out if they have medical issues and refer them, just through practitioners, to people that are experts, either through P Place or other organizations that can help them. Your generalist view of what's going on, you know what the problem with Houston is? We're going to Houston.
You know what?
By liberals. But I'll tell you what, the generalist state,
Do you have kids in public school right now?
of course I do. I have kids and grandkids. So I have a young grandchild. So I don't know what you're seeing in other cities in Texas, but if that's what's going on, vote the board out.
First of
and move.
all, I've been to 50 states. I've been to thousands of school districts. I've talked to school board members in all 50 states. This is going on all over the place. And I respect you entirely when you say that at your school, this is on the up and up and you're going to help kids. But do you actually think that that's all this is? That all the schools that are building clinics, do you actually believe that that's all that is?
No, I think there's let me tell you what, you're the first person to educate me on this topic. So I respect you. But I think that where it's evolved and monetizing and you're making money from it is wrong. And so what has happened is you've created this fear that government schools are a problem. Government schools are not a problem. The fact is you're a Texan. You're a Texan.
I'm not a Texan.
Okay. Then I don't know why we read that in the Bible, but at any rate, in Texas, we have a constitutional responsibility for the general diffusion of knowledge that we establish a system of efficient, free public schools. It's a constitutional responsibility. So as Republicans, if we want to change the Constitution, that's fine, but we are subdivision of the state.
Okay, couple of things.
Well, he says that nobody's refuted him. I'm telling you, you can refute many statements.
Nothing you said.
By fact, by the way.
Nothing you
Not
said.
generalism.
And I appreciate your
Well, I'm
comment.
thinking ahead, trust me, and I've got responsibility to do that.
Okay, that's fine. I will simply say that nothing you said refutes anything, number one.
No.
Because there can be positive uses to some of this overreach. There certainly can be. That doesn't stop the overreach. And I find it very callous and cavalier that you make the statement, if you don't like what's going on in your schools, move. That strikes me as shockingly insensitive to the vast majority of our parents and kids who can't just pick up and move.
Well, you're recommending you pull them out of
That's
school.
right.
What's the difference?
Because there are local options that are not public schools.
Yours is not a local option.
I'm not even telling them they should take my option. I'm telling you that in your city, Dallas here, tell me if I'm wrong, sir, that in Dallas, there are all sorts of non-government school options for parents who don't have to move a muscle.
I don't serve in Dallas, but you know what? That's true.
Fair enough. All right, let's go back to this. He's going to fix this. And you can have the first comment when we're done. And you can go, whatever you want to say and respond to, do. I'll give you the very first, and I won't even contradict you. You'll get the first shot at it. Get that up. Get that back up there. So, to move back to what we were talking about, Arnie Duncan makes it abundantly clear a couple of things, right? That the schools, which are increasingly controlled by the federal government, which is undisputably true, they need to be the center of the community. They need to be the center of your communities. They need a place where not just your kids learn, but where they're evaluated for many of the things this gentleman mentioned, where underprivileged kids, but overprivileged kids too, where they're going to be able to get health. Can I give you one example while I'm putting this together? In Green Bay last year, they won a huge grant, Green Bay, Wisconsin, where there's nothing in any of my bios about living in Texas, by the way. So you can check that. But I live in Wisconsin, and Green Bay won a huge government grant, federal government grant, because they were feeding kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner at public school. And they were feeding them all year. They were feeding them 9 months of the year. And they applied for a grant because they thought it wasn't fair that they're giving kids 3 meals a day, but they weren't feeding them in the summer, because of course the parents don't know how to feed their kids. So what they did is they won a grant so that they could open the schools all summer long. Memphis, Tennessee also won this grant. So they could feed kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner July, August, and September when kids were out of school. And then it got to the point where it was socially unjust, because we're only feeding kids, needy kids, kids below a certain income level. Because we're only feeding them, we are stigmatizing those children. So now in Green Bay and Memphis, Tennessee, you have to feed all kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All 12 months, right? And that's happening across the country too. This idea, right, that this federal intrusion into how our government schools are being run at the state and local level is completely innocent, is absurd. And Arnie Duncan's going to make that, look at that quote from him.
The one idea.
Here he is, that was 2009 when he was getting started building his clinics and making the schools the center of the community. Here's 2015, right before he left office. Here's an idea that Mr. Duncan had going out.
The one idea I threw out that I wanted to sort of road test it with the kids too, I thought, this idea of public boarding schools. And that's a little bit of a different idea or a controversial idea. The question is, do we have some children where there's not a mom, there's not a dad, there's not a grandma, there's just nobody home? And there are certain kids we should have 24/7.
Yeah, let's do that, right? And let's see how wonderful that sounds if you take a certain stab on it, right? Well, that's the federal government, right? Coming in and helping kids who have nobody home. Do we really have an epidemic in this country of 7-year-olds living in brownstones alone with nobody? And by the way, if we do have that problem, don't we have county agencies? Don't we have city agencies? Don't we have state agencies?
How about churches?
Church agencies, right? This idea that we need the federal government to be feeding our kids, providing them medical care, boarding them, public, we'll go back to our Prussian friends, right? Maybe we need public boarding schools. Maybe there are some of your kids that we need to have 24/7. There are none of your kids they need to have 24/7. There are all sorts of other ways to do it. And by the way, do you trust your federal government?
No.
To determine which kids get sent off to public boarding schools? And how long before it's not fair? The kids we've taken and put in public boarding schools are being given things by the federal government that the parents can't give them. Is it fair to only take some of the kids? It's like the school lunch programs, right? Remember when it was? School lunch just for kids who needed it? It's not that anymore, right? I get that putting warm food in a kid's mouth is a good thing, but not this way, right? And you heard the man. And that's the other thing. Who's doing the fear-mongering here?
Right.
Who's telling you this stuff? Take it up with Arnie. I'm going to keep playing these guys because again and again and again the progressives in charge are telling you what their objectives are. And here's another one. That's Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is about to tell you in his own words that they don't know if Common Core is going to work, and they won't know for 10 years. This is 2013.
It would be great if our education stuff worked.
but that we won't know for probably a decade.
So like No Child Left Behind, we spent about $15 billion on No Child Left Behind. 10 years later, it didn't work. Now they're telling you, give us more power, more control, more centralization, and more money, and maybe in 10 years it'll work. Come back and see me in 2023, excuse me. That was Bill Gates. How many of you have been told that Common Core is better than what you have? That Common Core are proven standards? That Common Core has been tested? No, it hasn't. He just told you that. And how about this? As a 25-year teacher not from Texas, I can tell you that I think the single biggest lie of Common Core, and the most dangerous one, is this argument that our teachers are free to teach however they want. That our teachers can do, there's standards, just abstract standards. Your teachers are free to do it any way you want to do it. Listen to what Mr. Gates said. And by the way, and I put this from 2009, right when the whole thing was getting rolling. You listen to Mr. Gates tell you where your stimulus money went in 2009 to the Department of Education, right? So he's going to verify what I just told you. And you listen to what freedom your teachers are going to have once the whole scheme is put together.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests. Next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core. When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
So, in January of 2009, 1 month in office, $350 million of your stimulus dollars had already gone to the Department of Education to create tests for standards that weren't written yet, number 2. And number 3, when the tests are finally aligned to the Common Core standards, guess what? The curriculum lines up too. Because teachers are evaluated on how the kids do on the test and little else, which means what? That your teachers are held hostage. Dave can back me up on this. I got about 4,800 letters from teachers across the country telling me, right, that they cannot teach what they know is right, that they are absolutely compelled to teach a narrative that's handed to them. And I'll tell you another thing, I would bet you, Texas, that many of you haven't seen the worst aspects of this yet in your schools. Why would you? You held out longer. This benighted idea that my school district is doing it right, and so therefore I have nothing to fear from this, is absurd. The premise of all of this is consolidation. What do you think common means? And there are schools in Wisconsin, by the way, who have not experienced the worst of this yet, but most of them have. And you know where it starts? Usually the bigger the school district, the first they are at fault. And then it spreads out sporadically from there. How about this guy? Let's talk about him. That's David Coleman. He's the architect of Common Core. That's his own. Go to his website, he calls himself that. He's the man most responsible for the standards. He's one of that group of 5 people who wrote them. David Coleman has never been a teacher, never been an educator, never taken a course in education. He's a complete political hack. He worked on the President Obama's 2008 campaign on the social media side of things. He helped use social media to get the president elected. And for that, the president put him in charge of this. Now I want you to hear how David Coleman is introduced in 2011 to a group of teachers about his still not quite written Common Core standards.
He has been involved in virtually every step of setting the national standards, and he doesn't have a single credential for it. He's never taught in an elementary school, I think. I actually don't know. He's never edited a journal, but I think he has written scholarly papers, and a variety of other things that everybody here has done some of. He hasn't done.
You'd think someone with Lauren's experience would understand you never tell the truth when you're introducing someone.
I actually think it's really important to try to base what I'm about to say to you on evidence I share with you rather than on the sands of my qualifications. So if I ask you or talk to you about doing something, it should be evident that it makes sense to you to do because I have no other authority.
Because I have no other authority, because I have no qualifications. Isn't it funny that a bunch of teachers are laughing at the fact that the guy in charge of 60 million American kids' school education standards has no background? All right? That's who's in charge of your stuff here, right? It gets better done. All right? How about this? Listen to this little quote from David Coleman.
So with that in mind, I'm about to jump in, but I'm just going to say one word about my own organization, which is Student Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards.
We are that collection of unqualified people who were involved in writing the standards. You want to know who the fearmonger is? It's that guy right there. Who put him in charge? What authority? By the way, who elected him to office? What accountability does that man have to you, the taxpayers, who pay the property taxes, that pay the teachers, and keep the schools open? What accountability does he have to you? It's nice to know that your local school boards are doing things right, but what accountability do your local school boards have to this guy who's completely transformed your kid's education without a single credential and without any accountability? What? How are you going to fix that at a school board level? Gets even more joyful. Let's go back to what I consider the biggest lie of them all, that your teachers can teach how they want. Listen to this.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving. There's no amount of saying, they teach to the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
So he's now bigger than the emperor and the pope. There is no force strong enough on this planet to prevent your teacher, I'm playing that again, to prevent your teachers from teaching to my tests. You want to keep calling them public schools, do you? What's public about this? This guy has no experience, no educational background, no educational training. He has no accountability to the taxpayers and to the voters. No accountability to teachers. And your teachers, with their degrees and their school boards who are trying to look out for him, your teachers have to teach to his test that you paid for with stimulus money. Listen to that again.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving. There's no amount of saying, they teach to the standards, not the test. We don't do that here. Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Like a teenage girl, right? Yeah. Whatever. Give them the hand. Dismissing the autonomy, the creativity, the flexibility, and the freedom of students and teachers. Completely overriding what teachers do in the classroom. You're going to teach to our tests, whether you like it or not. That's your architect of the Common Core. And I got to be careful here, because I don't think we'll get it all in now, so I want to be respectful of the time. All right. I'm going to have to skip the history standards. You should know this, though. You should know this. David Coleman, you know where he is now? After he wrote the national helped write the Common Core, the lead person on the Common Core, he immediately left the Common Core committee, and guess where he is now? He's the president of the college boards. So the same guy who wrote Common Core is now in charge of revising the ACTs. You know, the exams your kids have to take to get into college, to conform to his Common Core standards. Did you know that?
No.
SATs already, yeah, and he had a hand in revising that too. So this guy who has no educational background, not only did he completely rewrite how your kids were taught in the elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, now he controls the tests that your kids have to take to get into college. Isn't that interesting? Is that democracy?
No.
Is that representative government?
No.
Before today, have you heard this guy's name? No, but you keep calling them public schools, and you keep pretending that because Texas never took Common Core, you're safe. You keep pretending that my school's fine. You keep pretending that. And watch the whole thing get swallowed up. You keep pretending it. All right? So how do I do this effectively? All right. So why did I start by trying to show you the history standards? Because one of the things that the College Board does, David Coleman's College Board, is they're in charge of the AP courses. You know, all those advanced placement courses that your kids are dying to take to get college credit, David Coleman's rewriting them all now to conform to his Common Core worldview. So all your kids are taking these advanced placement history, the APUSH, was the very first one he rewrote. It's already in your schools. In fact, a woman from Texas showed me her teacher's edition of the book. I got copies from it. I'll read the opening here. So David Coleman now is changing how kids get college credit to conform to his standards. There is rising alarm over radical changes that have been made to the Advanced Placement American History Program, a program heavily supported by federal and state funding. This alarm flushes out another related travesty. the voice of the people, you weren't consulted on any of this, has been muted because corporatists and other elites, and by the way, I'm not just going after government here. See, people, they'll see that. Some people will see the government. I'm all over the corporations involved in this too. This is an unholy, you know what Common Core is succinctly? It's an unholy alliance between an out-of-control federal government that wants power and a very small group of crony capitalist companies that are making hundreds of billions of dollars off your kids. Do you know, by the way, Pearson Publishing? Pearson Publishing was given the uncontested contract to produce testing materials for the country, for Common Core. There was no bid going on here, which is illegal. Not only that, last year, Pearson Publishing was paid by the federal government $350 million to do what it otherwise would have done, which is write tests and material. So your federal government paid a private company $350 million to produce all these materials. Pearson then turned around and sold them to school districts in Texas and kept all the money. Do you know what Pearson makes on every Common Core test that's taken, national test? $30 a test. 60 million kids taking nationalized, standardized tests. 30 bucks a pop. And by the way, Pearson is not obligated, after they make all that money, to pay back the federal loan, right? That's crony capitalism, right? So to summarize, the private college board, headed by David Coleman, is now rewriting AP courses, starting with history. The new A-Push framework departs radically from the traditional AP course and now reflects progressive philosophy and leftist bias. And by the way, you have no control, Texas, over the AP courses. The AP courses all come from this college board. So you can, by all means, you can protect the way history is taught in Texas, although most schools aren't. Most schools are rolling over and adopting this because kids want that college credit. But you can't control Texas, what David Coleman's doing in Washington, D.C. You can't change that. And I guarantee you that the majority of Texas school districts, not all, maybe not even all that many more, but the majority of Texas schools are already doing this because the whole test that your kids take to get they pay money to take AP courses. If they get a 3, 4, or 5 on the AP test, they'll then get college credit. So they're paying to get a certain grade. There's no way they can pass the test unless history changes to meet the new testing standards, which is what David Coleman told you, right? Your teachers will teach to our test. We're in control. And what is the new standard? We're writing the courses. Forget the founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson isn't mentioned, by the way, one time, nor is Ben Franklin. Forget the founding fathers, principles of the Declaration of Independence, which has been taught, that proclaim the natural right of freedom and self-government. Ignore all previous state history standards, including Texas's, all of which were very good. Most of the previous, the ones that they replaced were really good. Texas had really good ones, right? To objections, this is a direct quote from David Coleman, to 160 university history professors, many of them progressives, wrote a petition to David Coleman telling him not to do it. That this was a disaster, a travesty. His response to that? To objections that students will learn an inaccurate version of American history, the College Board responded, David Coleman said, quote, facts aren't all that important anyway in teaching history. David Coleman argues that facts aren't important in history. Doesn't matter if you know 1776, doesn't matter. What matters, he says, are historical narratives, right? So let's start with the narrative that America is a racist country, and let's trace that for a semester. Let's start from the premise that America is a sexist or a bigoted or a homophobic country. Let's trace that. That becomes the entirety of the teaching of American history in schools. I've got examples. I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to keep going. Here's what it says about George Washington. George Washington gets one paragraph. Bill Clinton has 48 pages and counting. 48 pages in this text devoted to Bill Clinton. FDR gets about 120 pages. George Washington gets a paragraph, and here it is. Although he dressed in plain American broadcloth at his inauguration and claimed to be content with a plain Republican title, Washington was counted among the nationalists. He was anything but a man of the people. By nature reserved and solemn, he chose to ride about town in a grand carriage drawn by 6 horses and escorted by uniformed liverymen. In the tradition of British royalty, he delivered his addresses personally to Congress and received from both houses an official reply. End of Washington. No crossing the Delaware, no Thanksgiving Day prayer, no I will not take your crown. They want to paint him as a nationalist and a king, right? The irony is that he was offered a crown and turned it down.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Common Core doesn't cover history, right? Common Core is just English and...
No, it's not. Not anymore. Common Core now has... what's happened in your schools now is history, science, history, all the humanities have been covered under this umbrella English language arts. So in English language arts class now, that's where they're learning history. That's how they get away with this, right? Under the umbrella of English language arts, which now covers reading, writing, history, all that stuff gets covered there. And this is part of it now. Right? That's where they're learning this. And it gets even better. I can't, I want to the Ronald Reagan will crack you up. Now, that was 2 years ago. They did advanced placement U.S. history. They just finished the advanced placement European history course. 2 weeks ago, this came out. By the way, this is I'll give you the link for it. This is a progressive writer writing for, I think it's Salon or Slate, one of those places, progressive magazines, who's taking on what they did to European history. Quote, the new advanced placement European history framework has received a makeover that eliminates religion's influence on the development of Western civilization, ignores completely Winston Churchill, whitewashes the evils of communism, and lauds the welfare state. This is David Randall. He's from the Writing Center NAS, and the second organization will come up. Quote, this new curriculum omits the development of faith and freedom in European history and focuses on the development of the welfare state. The association released a report authored by Randall titled The Disappearing Continent that claims the framework warps and guts the history of Europe to make it serve its progressive agenda. Virtually all mention of religion in the 19th century is removed. Several key figures such as Christopher Columbus and Winston Churchill are not mentioned in the College Board's framework. David Coleman, the president of the College Board, was a major architect of Common Core standards developed under Obama. The College Board's new AP European history examination, quote, defines modernization around secularism, the state, and a thin support of intellectual history. It uses words like capitalism rather than the free market to note how consumers and capitalists work against the environment. Gives the sense that the Industrial Revolution contributed more to poverty than prosperity, whitewashes the repressive Marxist and Soviet histories of Eastern Europe, and predominantly features leftist enlightenment political thinkers. Again, time is running short on us. Well, because of the challenge, I want to make darn sure I leave time for questions. So that doesn't leave me a lot of time left here. So I'm sorry to have to do this. I have to skip the sexuality stuff.
Just know it's bad.
I will say this quickly. These are the National Sexuality Standards. They were written in 2012. 2012 is the exact same year that the Common Core standards were put in your schools. They were written, and if you look, by the way, if you look at page 6, you can go online, you type in the National Sexuality Standards, they'll come right up, 60-page document, you can read it. If you look at page 6, when the National Sexuality Standards were being written, what did they consult? Well, they consulted the Centers for Disease Control as the last one. We consulted to write the sexuality standards, the Common Core state standards for English language arts and mathematics. And to your question, sir, notice the way English is listed there. It's not just English class. It's English language arts. It's an umbrella course that includes modern history and what we would call social studies in it, right? And so why is the National Sexuality Curriculum consulting Common Core? Because Common Core is the delivery method for this stuff, right? They couldn't do this without Common Core in place. They control the tests, and because Pearson, what do you think Pearson's doing? Why do Pearson get $350 million from the federal government? To produce, so they're paying Pearson to make its product. Pearson then sells its product and keeps the money. What do you think the quid pro quo is? What do you think goes in those Pearson textbooks? Exactly what the federal government wants in them, right? That's why they're pulling so much radical sexualization out of first, second, third grade textbooks. That's why it's there, because it's part of this, right? Oh, and I can show you examples about how bad it is. I don't have time. They're here if you want the slides. Just go to what happened 2 days ago, a couple weeks ago. Washington State, in the great Northwest, the state of Washington, the Democrats just tried to get rid of Common Core. They quietly slipped in these comprehensive sexuality standards in Washington. They're in Wisconsin, by the way, too. I've got evidence of that. They said this would never happen in Washington State. These K-12 gender identity standards surprised Washington parents. Washington State adopted new gender identity guidelines in March 2016 as part of the state's updated health and physical education standard. Did you know that most states have already adopted Common Core Phys Ed? Did you know that? And you had mentioned that Common Core is only English and math. No, it's not. You took English. Most states took English and math. In Wisconsin, we took English and math. Guess what? They just put science in without even consulting us. The next generation science standards, we put them in. Most states now have adopted the physical, and that's how they fool moms and dads. These are the Common Core physical education standards. If you look at them, all they are the national sexuality standards. Gym class now becomes one of the places where they get all this stuff. Washington State adopted these new gender identity guidelines in March 2016 as part of the state's physical education standards. The state agency responsible for the guidelines said they were made available to the public for review and provided the Daily Signal with examples where it solicited comment. None of these revelations pointed to the addition of gender identity guidelines, instead referring to the proposal broadly as the state's new phys ed standards. Perhaps that's why the guidelines went unnoticed by both parents and the media, until Peter Hassett, a reporter for the Daily Caller, found them while doing research. Washington State's new gender identity guidelines map out specific standards for each grade level to achieve. These include teaching kindergartners, 5-year-olds, that there are many ways to express gender, defining sexual orientation to 4th graders, and describing to 5th graders, quote, how media, society, and culture can influence ideas regarding gender roles, identity, and expression, right? And if I had more time, I could have shown you all of these standards right from the actual document. And let's talk about math here, because that's a big deal as we wind down. That's Jason Zimba. He's one of the 5 people who wrote Common Core along with David Coleman. In fact, he was David Coleman's chief and really only math guru. Listen to what Jason Zimba says about Common Core math. He's going to tell you, admit to you on camera, that they were never meant to prepare your kids for college math. And that Common Core math is not created to prepare your kids for STEM careers. You know, science, technology, engineering, and math, all the important stuff. He's being interviewed by Dr. Sandra Stotsky, and so you won't see her. She's a great fighter of this as well. And here's Jason Zimba.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges.
It's not only not for STEM, the guy who wrote it said, it's not for selective colleges. And he's going to explain to you, for instance, if your kid wants to go to UC Berkeley, he better have pre-calculus. His program doesn't get that far. But you understand what a selective college is, right? A selective college is simply any college that has a basic math entrance exam. They all have them. It's not for STEM. Not only is it not for STEM, he says, this isn't going to prepare your kids for college math. Listen to it again.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you better have pre-calculus to get into UC Berkeley, right?
Engineering colleges.
And that's true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that, but your issue is really broader than that.
Oh yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that.
I'm not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
And if you think I'm cherry picking these clips, that's why I give them to you. Go look, right? I think he actually declowns himself more, not less, in the rest of the interview. But you heard it out of his mouth, right? We never intended this to prepare your kids for STEM career. How many school districts, obviously not yours, how many school districts in this state are using Common Core math right now? How many school districts in this state that never took Common Core are preparing Texas kids to take Common Core tests? It's a huge number. And you would move out of Texas? Okay, by all means, pick up and move out of Texas because of Common Core. Where are you gonna go? Where? Maine? Arizona? Washington State? That's the point of this, right? And they've only been doing this for 5 years. Forgive them if they haven't roped you all in yet. But you've heard out of their mouths what they're doing here. How about your president? These ridiculous standardized tests. How about your president? In 2008, when he was candidate Obama and not President Obama, listen to what he said about how dumb these standardized tests are.
Don't tell us that the only way to teach a child is to spend too much of a year preparing him to fill out a few bubbles in a standardized test. We know that's not true.
Don't tell us, right, that the best way to educate a kid is preparing them to fill out a few bubbles on a standardized test. 6 months later, he's your president, and the whole system's based exclusively on those tests now. Exclusively on those tests. It gets better when liberal icons like the guy who replaced Jon Stewart are mocking the testing. Right? Listen to John Oliver a couple months ago.
If standardized tests are bad for teachers and bad for kids, who exactly are they good for? Well, it turns out they're operated by companies like all these, and let's just focus on the largest one, Pearson. As of 2012, they had nearly 40% of the testing market, almost triple their nearest competitor. And if you've never heard of them, then congratulations. But just mention their name to any parent or teacher in a state they operate in, and you see what happens. A hypothetical girl could take Pearson tests from kindergarten through at least 8th grade, by tests, by the way, that she studied for using Pearson curriculum and textbooks taught to her by teachers who were certified by their own Pearson test. If at some point she was tested for a learning disability like ADHD, that's also a Pearson test. And if she eventually got sick of Pearson and dropped out, well, she'd have to take the GED, which is now, guess what, also a Pearson test. Their track record is littered with complaints concerning technical glitches, slow grading, and even the contents of their tests. Take what happened in New York just a few years ago.
Almost 30 different test questions have now been declared invalid because they're confusing or have outright errors. They'd already pulled 6 questions from an English exam related to a bizarre passage about a talking pineapple. Students had to answer questions about the story, which they say goes like this. A pineapple challenges a hare to a race. Other animals figure the fruit has a trick up its sleeve, but the hare wins and the animals eat the pineapple. It ends with the moral. Pineapples don't have sleeves.
I was really confused because I expected a lot more from them. That article about the pineapple and the hair was stupid and absurd.
By the way, right now, a couple years later, Pearson owns 80% of the textbook market, American public school textbook market, and 90% of all the tests created for Common Core are Pearson tests, paid by the government to do so, right? And that kind of garbage. Now, this will blow your hair. Do you know teachers aren't allowed to see the tests? You say the standards are necessary to fix education, and that teachers should teach the standards. But if that's true, then wouldn't you let teachers see the mistakes? Because if teachers can see the exams and see the mistakes, they can fix them, but teachers aren't allowed to see them. Teachers aren't allowed to grade them. Teachers didn't write the tests. Teachers don't grade the tests. Teachers don't get to see the tests. You want to keep arguing that this is about education? Go for it. Watch this little clip. You know who they're getting to grade your kids' tests? Pearson Publishing is taking out Craigslist ads to pay $9 an hour. Did you apply for this? All right, you did not. Do you have any educational background, man? You do. $9 an hour, right? To grade tests for Pearson.
The company posted this ad to Craigslist. It's to find people to grade the exams.
We looked at an essay every 2 minutes, a short answer every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. We don't understand your kids. We don't understand anyone's kids.
I was told when I was beginning a project that last year, there were a certain amount of 2s, a certain amount of 3s, a certain amount of 4s. We expect that to be similar this year. If that's not similar, they will tell you, we're scoring too many 3s, we're scoring too many 4s. And they'll say, you have to learn to see more papers as a 3, you have to learn to see more papers as a 4.
A 25-year university professor, I cannot grade an essay in 2 minutes. I can't do it, can't come close to doing it. How do you grade a short answer in 5 seconds? In other words, these tests don't matter educationally. They were not designed to have any impact on education. They're designed to gather data on your kids. They're designed to rank and sort. They're designed to provide all sorts of secondary corollary things to the federal government. They have nothing to do with your kids' education. And yet your kids' entire education is predicated on them. Your teachers' careers, in many instances, depend on those tests. Teachers don't see them. Teachers didn't write them. How many of your colleagues that were grading tests with you from Craigslist were actually had educational background? You were doing it at home, okay? Right? And you see the problem here. And then how about that last part? We were told how to grade them. Too many, we were told that there were not enough 4s or 3s, right? We were told that we have to learn to see some of those tests. In other words, they had a predetermined outcome they wanted. And they were telling the primarily non-educators who were grading the tests, they were telling them that you need to grade more this way because they were going for a preconceived, how much money in Texas are you paying on tests of some sort? And you can go ahead and rename all the tests you want. Right? We're not doing smarter ballots. We have the Sunshine State test in Florida, right? Do the same thing with the Florida stamp on them. Mike Pence, new vice president, right? Not a candidate. He did the same thing in Indiana. Indiana people hated Common Core, so our stalwart Republican, Mike Pence, said, okay, we don't like it, we'll get rid of it. So what did he do? Mike Pence just turned it over to the Indiana education people. They kept 95% of Common Core and labeled them Indiana standards, right? That's the kind of efficient government that we get. And as you see, I hope you see by the time we're done here. This is not a Democrat problem. It's not a Republican problem. This is a Washington Beltway problem. This is a big government versus the rest of us problem, right? This completely transcends. You gave me your bona fides, right? Mine are like yours. But I don't see it as a problem to call out Republicans when they do stuff like this, and they do it all the time, right? And this is part of our problem. But they not only the tests not matter, they're rigging the scoring of the tests, and they have non-professionals generally doing them for $9 an hour. I gotta skip the ESC. This will get you mad. This is the December of last year, when Christmas week, the Republicans who control the House and the Senate, without anybody knowing it, Paul Ryan, Wisconsin, he forced through an 1,100-page bill called the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA. And you know what that bill did? Nobody's ever heard of it? And the Republicans put it through. Ryan gave his committee, his Republicans, 2 days to read 1,100 pages before they had to vote on it. No one read it. And you know what it does, the ESSA? All the illegal things that I just showed you that Common Core did, it retroactively provides indemnifies them. That your Republicans took all that nasty business you just saw and unilaterally gave the federal government cover for it. From the Pulse, 2016, right? Despite warnings from anti-Common Core activists, Republican lawmakers ran through the new federal education bill, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or the ESSA, setting in concrete the destructive educational policies of the Obama administration, including Common Core. We now have proof that Republican leadership, including Senator Lamar Alexander, Tennessee Representative John Klein, House Speaker Paul Ryan, betrayed their constituents, giving the federal government unprecedented control over education. This is not demagoguing. This is not political partisanship. This is not us versus them. This is not you pull your kids out of school and send them to mine. It's none of that stuff. Which is why I make damn sure that every voice you hear up here is traceable, and you can go see it. And most of them, almost all of them, are progressives. A little bit further there. They betrayed their constituents, giving the federal government unprecedented control over education. Ryan allowed Congress just 2 days to study the ESSA legislation. More than 1,000 pages written over a 10-year period. In a just-released interview, this was December, Christmas week, on a Friday, Christmas week, when you were shopping, that's when they did all this. In a just-released interview with political pro Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, you know, the one so benevolently building all those clinics to help poor kids. That's what he's doing, right? Arnie Duncan did this. He said about what the Republicans did, quote, "I'm stunned at how much better it ended up than either the House or Senate bill going into conference. I had a Democrat congressman say to me that it's a miracle. He's never seen anything like it. If you look at the substance of the bill the Republicans passed, embedded in the law are the values that we've promoted and proposed forever. The core of our agenda from day one. It's all in there. For the first time in our nation's history, Arnie Duncan said, the federal government controls the course of education. Your state school superintendents be damned, your state laws and legislations be damned, we control it. And when you go back to those things that I showed you from the beginning, the core of our agenda from day one, what do you think he means? The schools are places of control, places where we shape the will of kids, places where we make them amenable to the view of big government. That's what they become. It is really hard to argue against that. That's a direct quote from Arnie Duncan. You can watch the video. He's gloating about it. The Republicans, at one point he says in the interview, the Republicans gave us things we wouldn't have dared to ask for. It's a little better. Arnie Duncan, here's just some more quotes from Arnie Duncan on the complicity of Republicans. Alexander and Klein, quote, "We had many, many conversations behind the scenes. And I said, Arnie Duncan, for us to support it, for us, we progressives, to support this bill, they'd have to shed their far, far right, i.e. constituents to support the Constitution, and oppose Common Core. So if you're against Common Core, you're the far, far right, right? But you know that, right? You know that's where we've gone, right? If you're a Trump voter, you're a Nazi. We know that now. And the Constitution, right? And I, Arnie Duncan, said to these Republicans, we'll support it, but you're going to have to shed your far, far right wing. I honestly didn't know if they'd have the political courage to do that, but they both said they would, and they did, and I give them tremendous credit for that. Duncan, and here's Arnie Duncan on his backroom chat with Paul Ryan. Quote, about a month before final Senate passage of the bill, I ran into Speaker Ryan, and we just talked briefly. I asked if he was going to back this, whether he's willing to take on the far right. I asked him straight up, and he said, absolutely, quote, unquote. We're going to back this. And he did. And that's when I thought we had a real shot. So just remember, right, before you get all partisan on me, there's blame to go around here all over the place. And let's end with her. Let's get the end of it, right? Because I want you to listen. I've made the argument here that the primary purpose of education is not school. It's not mastery of subject. It's not preparing your kids for careers. The primary purpose of your kids' schools now, government schools now, is ideology. For a long time when I was going through the schools, I noticed this. Most of your kids, if they're paying attention, notice the bias in their classroom. May not be in every classroom, but it's in a lot of them. And for a long time, we were educating kids, giving them a decent education in reading, although we were falling farther behind every year. But there was always this undercurrent of progressive politics behind everything. I think what's changed now with Common Core, this is all that's changed, is that now for the first time, the ideology has superseded the actual teaching, right? What was an undercurrent of progressive teaching and thinking is now the primary purpose. And whether or not these kids achieve or succeed or can pass the test, that's way below this now. That's why they've created tests. They really don't care how kids perform on them. There's no way kids are going to do well, and it doesn't matter. They're looking for other things beside this. And I didn't have time to put this up. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, back again, 20 minutes from where I live, Green Bay, Wisconsin now is all excited because they've passed a new referendum that they got the Wisconsin DPI to approve. They will no longer grade students with A, B, C, D, F. They will give kids an impressionable grade, they call it, an impression grade. And they're going to wealthy school districts with kids who are well taken care of, they're going to have their grades artificially lowered. And inner city kids who are already struggling will have them artificially inflated to account for economic inequity, social justice. Right? So Green Bay, Wisconsin is a pioneer in Wisconsin. They're the first district that will grade kids not on achievement or ability, but on their socioeconomic backgrounds and circumstances. And that, I just didn't have time to type that into the computer, you'll find it. Just didn't have time to put it in yet. And here's, last year in April, here's probably the next president of the United States. And I want you to listen to what she said about Common Core, and I want you to listen to what she said about education.
You know, when I think about the really unfortunate argument that's been going on around Common Core, it's very painful. How do we end up at a point where we are so negative about the most important non-family enterprise in the raising of the next generation, which is how our kids are educated?
So there you go. Education is a non-family enterprise. The single most important non-family enterprise in the raising of the next generation is education. There you have it. Now, I ran a little long, but they don't seem to be throwing out yet. Now, I'm going to give this gentleman a chance to say whatever he wants. I'm not going to even argue. And I do respect, sir, that you're here and you didn't walk out. I appreciate that. So you're going to get to say whatever you like, and if there's time, we can have more questions. I will say this by way of closing up for me here. I do what I do regardless. And I make this point all the time. If what I really wanted was more parents pull their kids out of schools and send them to me, then I wouldn't say a word about Common Core. Just let it run its course. Let it run its course. Right? Because there's no homeschooling in the last year has gone from 2 million to 3 million families. It's huge. Right? It's burgeoning. In fact, homeschooling is actually outpaced new public school enrollments. There are 1,000 ways to educate your kids in our government schools. And none of them have anything to do with me. And you know what? From a biblical perspective and from a common sense perspective, I'm going to say this. You are the primary educators of your kids. If you are content to drop your kids off 8 to 10 hours a day and let the federal government or anybody else educate them solely, well, that's fine. You have that right. But you have to expect that if you send your kids to Christian schools, theoretically, they're going to come out more Christian, or at least as Christian as when they went in. You send your kids to government schools, what do you think is going to happen? You shouldn't be surprised by any of this. You shouldn't be. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that there aren't good schools or good teachers. What I did when I was coming through is even at the university, I could always find 1 or 2 professors in a 30 English department, right, that I could sort of gravitate to. But that shouldn't have to. The liberal kids don't have to hunt for progressive professors. The non-liberal kids have to find them, and they're very rare. And all that's trickled down now. I go back to this. You know, if you think your values are important, and you have every right as parents to instill your values in your children, your faith in your children, your view of world, your worldview with your kids, you can't give them to the government school 7, 8, 10 hours a day and expect them to keep it. They may, although the evidence seems less and less, they may be able to learn to read a little bit, do a little bit of math. Almost half my college kids right at the 7th, 8th grade level. That's not even the progressive professors who I work with will tell you that that's the case. So I think we're going to wrap this up soon. So my final word to you is, I don't care how you do it, but my advice to you is if you can't homeschool your kids or you can't find a safe space for them, then pay attention to what they're doing when they bring their textbooks home. Go up to the school. If they're not bringing textbooks home, go to the school and demand to see them. If you're not keeping accountable with that, you're going to lose them, right? And I apologize for going so long. Sir, take a moment and rebut or comment any way you want.
Well, I appreciate you. First of all, there's about 70% I agree with you on, and I've always used you as a platform.
Thank you.
But there's so much I agree with you on Core, and your closing comments, I couldn't disagree with anything out of there your comments on government. If parents invested in the public school system with their students like they do charter schools and private schools, it'd be a lot different situation. They could have more influence. Where I disagree with you on is what's happening in Texas. And I don't know. You're Shakespearean, so I'll never win a debate with you.
No.
But
I see that. I don't live in Texas.
But you see that, but you've not been able to respectfully go into classrooms and show us in this school district, in this classroom, at this grade level, this is what's happening. It's a general. You're right. It's a general statement. So yes, we had some issues with the math teachers, and we had issues rolling out new curriculum. But A-Push is an example. You're right about A-Push. I mean, David Coleman, I don't believe David Coleman is on our side. I don't believe Marty Duncan's on our side. But A-Push, the difference you didn't make, distinction you didn't make is there's a difference between the instructional material on the textbook side and the framework. We don't use the framework in our school district. We write our own curriculum. And that's how we get past David Coleman trying to do that piece of it. Now, if a parent wants the kid to take the test, that's up to the parent. Again, parent capital makes a difference, so we agree on that. If parents applied the same capital to the public school system, we as Christians would see a huge difference in that. I don't believe there's a conspiracy in Texas schools by school board members and teachers to bring in Common Core. I don't disagree with you on the development.
No, I think that's well, so let me ask this. How many moms and dads here have exactly the opposite experience?
I had opposite experience. My son is being exposed to this Common Core garbage.
Go ahead.
And you are wrong, sir.
Well, give him an
It
example.
is in this state.
Give him an example. What's
An
your
example,
school?
my son is right here, Northwest School District, one of the better districts in the North Metroplex. And I can guarantee you they're teaching them this Common Core garbage in mathematics. And my son struggled with it, and I even tried to help him at elementary level. And he was labeled as a problem child simply because he couldn't do it. I looked at the homework to try to help him. I couldn't figure it out. Hold on. And then when I go in to address the teachers and I ask them straight out, is this Common Core? They didn't answer my question. They call it strategies, other things, just like the gentleman is saying. They're playing games. They're playing the shell game of moving the names around. They can call it whatever they want, just like in Florida Sunshine Test. Here, they changed it from tax to star. So don't tell me that it's not happening here. And lastly, you mentioned about the textbooks. I can tell you that I went just this year and I asked the administrators too, not the teacher, the principal and vice principals. I want textbooks for my son. We don't have textbooks. We don't have textbooks at all, just like you had said during your presentation.
And I want to,
the
gentleman made an important statement that he is not aware of this going on in Texas. Are there other districts of moms? Can you tell?
I just want to tell you that on Constitution Day, several of us went to Louisville Independent School District, board.
Please speak up.
Several of us, we were with the Constitutional Group, went to the Louisville Independent School District to ask them what they were teaching. And only one of them could tell us that our state is a republic, not a democracy. But because they were stuck by our questions, they gave us 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade history books. So I can tell you, they gave us 3 weeks to review them. I can tell you it's in the Louisville Independent School District.
So when was that? Because you've got officers in the school board here, and none of us that I'm aware of were in that meeting.
Okay.
So what school board did you meet with?
It was, I'll have to
Because
get the
we're
names, but.
okay, but this is my point. This, and I respect what you're saying. You should go to Dr. Rue and ask her for textbooks. She's no longer there, of course, but you know what? The fact is, math, everybody's been struggling with math. Everybody's trying to create a connection that everything wrong in Texas schools today is related to Common Core. There may be some where there's influence, but your district needs to write curriculum that opposes that. And that's the freedom we have within the local schools, is to develop our own curriculum. That is allowed. And so we have...
I thought that was not allowed in
no,
the state. You had to adhere to the state board.
I'm sure you've been told that.
We do have to close up shop because they're
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that.
I want to encourage
That
you,
is the
if you'd
first.
like to join us at Nick and Sam's, Lynn will be over here and you can make a donation and get a book, and your book will be your entrance in, and we welcome you to have these conversations. I'll let you get the last.
Yeah, let me just make one last comment, because I get the gentleman's point. He is right that school districts are the key. The state's not going to help you, the feds aren't going to help you. And I mean, one answer is, if you don't like the district you're in, move. The one thing I think, and my critique of what you said would be this. The one thing that I think is a little bit pie in the sky is the idea that most school districts are going, even if you put people on the school board, are going to spend the time and money to write their own stuff. That the vast majority of your school districts are going to default to the status quo. And every other state has the way it is, right? And it happens all over the place. So maybe then y'all move to his district if he's telling you the truth. Maybe that's the answer.
And let me close with this. And Randy, you can attest to this. And Mr. Ames, this is Bill Ames, who's written books on the social studies and the history in Texas. Right now, in Texas, the next generation of assessments and accountability, our last legislative session set up a commission. I know we need to get out. Set up a commission to look at the next generation of assessments and accountability. And I will tell you, and these school districts that are buying in right now to the districts of innovation and all of the carrot, if you will, they're buying in, one, the rules and regulations have not even been set in place by the TEA. If you read that bill, House Bill 1842, I believe it is, it gives all the power to the Commissioner of Education, the appointed Commissioner of Education. And in that bill, it says that your school district is not exempt from adhering to the state and federal assessments and the federal guidelines. And those state assessments, just like Dr. Pesta said, the Common Core, people were buying it before the standards were even written. The next generation of assessments and accountability has not even been written. So if you buy in, you say, I take the carrot, and then your district is going to be evaluated from an A through F system based on these assessments and accountability that have not even been written. That's how they will take over the schools. Because if you're in a school district like mine, we win state championships and everything. We've got the Lone Star Cup. We are great. But if we are not aligning to this Common Core philosophy of education, when the next generation of assessments and accountability is exactly what they said.
Right.
When our school districts are not adhering to those assessments and accountability, we will be graded in an A through F system, and they will start taking over our schools and bringing in charter schools. And the difference between a charter school and a traditional public school is a locally elected school board. Charter schools are run by an appointed board, and that appointed board is beholden to whoever's giving the money.
That's right.
So that's the lie, and it's in Texas, and it's coming. And if you're not paying attention like Randy and all of us to what's being said in that next generation of assessments and accountability meeting, or what's being said in the SBOE meeting, where all day yesterday they talked about collaboration. And how do we assess on collaboration? How do we set up the rubrics to assess on, and our commissioner, one last thought, the Commissioner of Education said in the next generation of assessments and accountability that we need formal teeth, formal standards that will evaluate the non-cognitive character traits of students, and teachers will be evaluated on it. That's scary. One last question.
Okay. I commend all of you for recognizing your message of the issue. I'm currently getting an application to become an educator in the Texas school system. So I agree this is a huge problem. That being said, how do we fix it? Because like just saying that like
let me hop in on that real quick.
Just real quick. Something is a problem. Like okay, yeah, like dog poop is terrible.
Well, but you have to clean it up. You're right. You're exactly right. The problem in giving these speeches, the problem is about half the audience doesn't even know what it is yet still. And so the way you fix it, and I go back to him, the way you fix it is to try to assert as much local control as you can. It's local control. The more you can put the right people on the school board, the better chance that you have. And I want to leave on a high note. I really do. And it's this. Look, in Wisconsin,
I will tell you, in the state of Texas, we are, and you can find it online if you go to womenonthewall.org. There will be a petition up tomorrow morning, a cease and desist petition to cease and desist the next generation of assessments and accountability that were set up by the Texas legislature and are being put in place by the governor and the Commissioner of Education. So there will be a cease and desist letter up tomorrow morning. I will take, there is a petition up for the math here in Texas, and that petition was mentioned today by State Board of Education Ken Mercer, that they will, so they're listening. So it's a combination of those type of things. It's a combination of having local school board members who have the guts and the courage to stand up strong and to push back against the state and the federal government.
And you have more freedom in Texas than any other state in the union right now. So that as bad as it is here, it's much worse in the other states. You have a fighting chance, but now, are you getting in the classroom? Are you clearing the board?
I'm going to be a teacher in school.
Are you seeing this coming down on you?
Yeah, I do. I work in the ISD. I'm just saying that, like, I mean, you understand why standards exist, right? And why, so there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, but that's
and it's like, so at the end of the day, we want our next generation. So when my parents, when my grandparents, when everybody's dead, and our kids are raising the next generation, it's, in a sense, like, nobody knows how to do anything. And part, like, pros and cons, it's like, you're kind of throwing it out there, like, the teachers and the robots are just leaving the classroom and people just are looking at the textbook and being like, okay, here's the textbook and this is what it is.
You said standards.
Totally,
I know it's not.
what it is.
You said standards. No one's against standards. I'm not. I want you to control the standards. You know those 30 kids in your classroom better than anybody. I want you.
But in part, that's what I'm doing regardless, because if we have a standard in my eyes, where part of who's actually running the classroom, like the teachers, there are people who can be in front of your kids. Regardless of what the textbook might be saying or what the state might be telling you to actually be doing, okay, I might have to write stuff on the board just because the principal might walk down the hall and see it on the board. But at the end of the day, like what I'm actually going to be telling the kids is really about the founding fathers.
But what you're saying is, to do what you feel you need to do, you have to go subversive. To be the kind of teacher you want to be. We're right.
I'm not a robot.
But what we're saying is, let's fix the system so you don't have to hide it.
It's not even in Texas, as you're saying, it's not that serious yet. Because
writing standards are bad, but we got to tweak this poor fella needs to get out of here. It's a great problem.